All right, let's dive into one of the biggest, most persistent puzzles in all of sociology, the absolutely massive gap in crime rates between men and women. I mean, this difference is so huge, it practically screams for an explanation. So, in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly that. So, here it is, the big question. Why do the official numbers show men committing so much more crime than women? Now, this might seem simple on the surface, but trust me, the answers are anything but. They're going to take us deep into how our society is structured, the roles we're expected to play, and even the justice system itself. And just to see how stark this is, check this out. The latest arrest figures from the Ministry of Justice: men account for a whopping 84% of all arrests. Women? Just 16%. That's not a small gap, that's a chasm. It's one of the most fundamental features of our crime statistics. Okay, so before we can even begin to tackle the why, we have to fully get our heads around the what. So let's take a quick look at how this pattern plays out across the entire criminal justice system. You see, this gender gap isn't just a blip at the arrest stage. No, it carries on all the way through. Get this, 4 out of every 5 convicted offenders are men. And when you look at who's actually in prison, women make up just 4% of the prison population. 4%! The disparity even shows up in sentencing, with men getting much longer sentences on average. Even the types of crime are different. Men completely dominate the stats for violent crimes, while women are more likely to be convicted for things like theft. The really crucial takeaway here is that this is a deep, consistent pattern, every single step of the way. So, our first big explanation kind of flips the whole question on its head. Instead of asking, why are men so criminal, it asks, well, why are women so conformist? And according to some sociologists, the answer is all about the invisible walls of a patriarchal society. This brings us to a really classic theory from sociologist Frances Heidenstone. It's called control theory, and her argument is actually pretty simple. Women commit less crime because, frankly, they have fewer chances to. In her view, a society built on patriarchy just keeps a much tighter leash on them. So how does that actually work? Well, Heidenstone breaks this control down into 3 areas of our lives. First, at home. Think about the bedroom culture for daughters. They're often supervised way more closely than sons. And for adult women, the huge responsibilities of housework and childcare literally restrict their time and freedom. Then you've got work, where male-dominated offices can block women from getting to the top, where those big corporate crimes happen. And finally, in public, there's the constant pressure for women to maintain a respectable reputation, and the very real fear of male violence, which shapes where they go and what they do. All these things together just shrink the space where crime could even happen. Okay, Heidenstone's theory is pretty powerful, right? It makes a lot of sense, but it also raises a new question. If women are under all this control, why do any of them commit crimes at all? And that's where our next sociologist comes into the picture. This quote really gets to the heart of the idea from sociologist Pat Carlin. She basically argued that for most women, following the rules comes with a set of rewards. But what happens when those rewards just aren't there? Well, suddenly, crime can start to look like a perfectly rational choice. Carlin talks about these 2 unwritten deals that society offers working-class women. First, there's the class deal. It's pretty straightforward. You work a respectable job, and in return, you get to buy things and have a decent life. Then there's the gender deal, which is more traditional. Be a loving wife and mother, and in return, you'll get support, both financially and emotionally, from your husband. But here's the kicker. When Carlin actually interviewed 39 female offenders, she found that for them, these deals were a total sham. Most had lived in crushing poverty, so the class deal was never really on the table. And many came from backgrounds of abuse or had been in the care system, so the gender deal was broken right from the start. For them, crime wasn't some moral failing. It was a logical way to survive when society's promises of a good life never came through. Now, there's another key theory from the 70s we have to talk about, Freda Adler's liberation thesis. She made a pretty controversial prediction back then. She said that as feminism succeeds in breaking down barriers, women won't just move into boardrooms, they'd also move into organized crime. The core idea is that as women's roles in society become more like men's, their patterns of crime will too. It's a really important idea because it directly links female crime to social change. All right, so we've looked at why women might commit less crime, but now it's time for a major pivot. Let's flip the script and ask the question that often gets overlooked because it seems so obvious. What is it about masculinity that leads to so much more crime? To answer that, we need to get familiar with this concept of hegemonic masculinity. Now, that sounds academic, I know, but it's basically the dominant, idealized version of what a real man is supposed to be in our culture. Tough, in control, the breadwinner. It's not how all men are, but it's this high-pressure social standard that all men are kind of pushed to live up to. For generations, one of the main ways for working-class men to prove their manhood was through tough, physical work. Being a miner, a factory worker, a steel worker, these were more than just jobs. They were identities. They were built on strength, on providing for your family, on being a real man. So here's the million-dollar question. What happens to that identity when the factories close down and the mines are all shut? Where do men go to prove their manhood now? And that's exactly what sociologists like Messerschmitt and Winlow dug into. They argue that when those traditional, legitimate ways to do masculinity, like being the family breadwinner, are taken away, some men will look for alternatives. And for them, crime becomes a resource. Suddenly, violence, taking risks, asserting dominance, these become ways to accomplish masculinity and get that status and respect. Winlow's research on bouncers is a perfect example, showing how the rise of the nighttime economy even created new jobs where being violent is a valued skill. So we've got theories about patriarchal control and we've got theories about masculinity, but hang on, because there is one final massive twist to this whole story. What if the very statistics we started with, that giant 84-16 split, are actually misleading? What if we can't even trust the numbers? This is the basic idea behind something called the chivalry thesis, which was first floated way back in 1950. The theory goes that the criminal justice system, which is mostly made up of male police, prosecutors, and judges, is socialized to be chivalrous or protective towards women. As a result, they might see women as less guilty, less of a threat, and more in need of help than punishment. So is this for real? Well, the evidence is kinda all over the place. On the one hand, some studies do find that women are less likely to be sent to jail and more likely to just get a caution for similar crimes. But on the other hand, feminist sociologists argue that the complete opposite can also be true. Courts can come down harder on women if they don't fit the stereotype of a good woman, like if they're seen as bad mothers. And as sociologist Kate Walklate points out, just look at rape trials, where it so often feels like the female victim is the one on trial, having to prove her own respectability. And here's the most important point of all. This isn't just about gender. The whole idea of chivalry completely ignores intersectionality. You ask Black women, you ask working-class women, and they often report facing much, much harsher treatment from the justice system, not leniency. So any bias that exists is way more complicated than just simple, old-fashioned chivalry. Which leaves us with this incredible puzzle. Is that huge gender gap we started with a real reflection of how people behave, something shaped by social controls and masculine pressures? Or is it more of a statistical illusion, cooked up by a biased justice system? The real answer is probably a messy mix of all three. And it forces us to question everything, not just who commits crime, but how we see it and how we measure it in the first place.